Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Geek Out podcast,
where we geek out about just about anything. I'm one of your hosts, Jeff.
I'm your other host, Dave, and today we are joined by
Christina. I'm a reference librarian here at the library.
And Matt, I'm a circulation desk worker.
So, given it is December, so we're going to talk about something a little thematically relevant, which, I don't know, what do you think the best way to describe this is?
Well, we're discussing predominantly in this case specifically the Christmas specials of the studio Rankin and Bass.
And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the name, maybe you're familiar with their brand of stop-motion animation, particularly their first feature, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Yes, their so-called animagic animation.
Boy, is it. So, let's start off. Christina.
Yes.
What is your connection with Rankin Bass?
Being the oldest one here, I could say that I've been watching them since I was probably hatched. So I have a real nostalgic connection to them. Just growing up every year, they were on television, so it was something that was really part of a family tradition, and for me, it just has a real nostalgic factor. Yeah, I mean, as a kid, you're drawn to that type of thing, so I grew up watching a lot of cartoons, and granted, this isn't a cartoon, but it just felt very similar in that vein, and as I've gotten older, it still is very appealing to me, so I think it's something that's really unique in that way. So for me, it was just really just takes me back to being a kid again.
I feel like Rankin Bass was like the quintessential Christmas stuff when I was growing up. If like at a certain age, you were just kind of shown like, this is Christmas specials. Like they weren't even called specials then. They were just like, these are the Christmas movies kind of to us. They were kind of presented as movies, but they were always shorter. So like our attention span would follow it. And I guess it wasn't until I was older that I realized they were all connected. Cause then when I would see some of the ones that were familiar, I'm like, they stole that. They stole it from another movie. But then obviously as I got older, I realized they were like all connected, and that was pretty cool. Kind of like a Christmas MCU, if you will.
I mean, it kind of is.
Yeah. They do show up in other ones.
There's a handful of recurring characters, although they don't always look exactly the same. Those models probably did not survive well.
If it's anything like things from that era, production just did not preserve them well enough.
Oh, well, I mean, Rankin and Bass are kind of a major turning point in Western animation. They're the first studio to outsource to overseas.
Yeah.
So even if those things were well preserved, they probably weren't in the same country when plans were being drawn up for the next film.
Mm-hmm. I also wanted to mention, for me, when I was growing up, this was something you could only catch at a certain time, because I grew up at a time where there was no DVR, there were no DVDs, and if you had a VCR, it probably cost $500. So things like that weren't always available, so it was a real special moment in time for us. Whereas now, like, it's wonderful because, I mean, they air them on, I won't say stations, but plenty of stations, often. And I actually own the DVD collection now, so I could watch it at any time I like. So, it's gone from being something that was really special and hard to find to something that's much more, I think, predominant now. And that's probably been the case for, a good couple of years, because everyone I've talked to has seen them no matter how old they are.
Yeah, I feel like it is kind of a Christmas rite of passage. Once you're old enough to have memories of Christmas, you probably were shown these movies. And you probably saw them before then, too. You just don't realize it.
Right.
I feel like I had one of them on VHS, but the rest, like you said, I had to like catch them on TV. I would have to I remember having to look through like the TV guide to be like, all right, when are they playing it? What channel? At what time? And it always seemed like it was either like the perfect time or like an hour on either side of when I had to be at school. And I was like, no, I'm going to miss the Island of Misfit Toys because I'm in algebra. No.
Thank you for bringing that up, because the Island of Misfit Toys is really my favorite, I'd say my favorite part of Rudolph. And Hermie as well. I have to bring up Hermie. He was also my favorite character. I don't know if we're going to talk about the content of each one.
I mean, I don't know that we'd have enough time to talk about all of them. They're...
Well, we can't do a deep dive, but we can absolutely talk about our favorite characters from these different things.
Definitely a Yukon Cornelius
yes.
stan.
Yukon Cornelius has been
thrown on me so much.
He's so entertaining.
The only thing that bothered me, because I'm a dog lover, and I get that that's part of his shtick, is like he lives up there, he has to mush the dogs. But I wasn't keen on that. But at the end, I think at one part, the dogs actually hopped on the sled And he either had to pull them, so that was a little poetic justice for me in that regard. But he's very
I think I was too young to realize that's what he was doing. And
I realized it when I was older,
they were mushing, and I was just like, "That's just what dogs. Do."
Yes,
I mean,
yes. Yeah, I can see that. I think as you get older, you think about certain things differently, maybe. You know, like I think of the Year Without a Santa Claus and Vixen, they dress her up as a dog, so they don't know that she's a reindeer, and she gets sent to the pound, and I'm like, oh no, what's going to happen to her in the pound? But when you're a kid, just like you're saying, Matt, it's like you don't think about all these other, you're just enjoying it, and you know, you're drawn in by what you're seeing.
Well, I rewatched Rudolph last year because we were showing it to someone who grew up not ever seeing any of these.
Wow.
Whoa.
People exist like that?
Yeah, it's weird. But the thing that really kind of freaked me out was, and I never thought about it as a kid, and I guess spoilers, but, you know, the way they deal with the abominable snowman.
Are you talking about when Herbie pulls his teeth out? Or
take out all of his teeth.
Yeah. It's
like
kind of sadistic.
I'm sorry, it caught me off guard. I was like, this is barbaric.
They said, welcome to the Saw universe, abominable snowman.
There's also, like, the part at the end, I think we may have talked about this, Dave, off of the podcast, but, you know, with the Misfit toys and Santa's delivering them at the end, and there's the bird who can't fly, and they kind of just throw him off. I think he only can swim, so there's certain things you're like, wait a second. You know, you don't think about them, but it is kind of a little bit dark at times. There's some dark stuff.
They were cool for putting the boat that can't float in the water. Like, that just seems like, no, you don't do that.
Yeah.
Well, now, only because Pinocchio came out, and that's set in, like, fascist Italy. If we're talking about how dark these movies can be, when you're thinking about the fact that Burgermeister was definitely, like, a dictator.
Oh, my God.
And while he was, like, no toys, when you think about it in the context of the time, it's like... Ooh.
They were burning toys, right?
Yeah. What are you guys preaching here? What's going on?
He was absolutely a Prussian. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I feel like as a kid, like, the two big bads, like, of the non-mainstream, like, movies were him and then the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And I always kind of, like, group them together, and I never thought of them as, like, super bad guys, but then I'm like, okay, kidnapper and dictator. That's quite dark.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's also... we talked about the Year Without a Santa Claus, but the best part of the Year Without a Santa Claus for me was the Heat Miser and Snow Miser, which I know people either love or hate that, or they love or hate the song, and I think that's a real featured part of the film for me.
I think that film specifically has had a renaissance.
Oh, do you?
I believe so as well, yeah.
There's been a lot of recent content made using especially that song.
Even on TikTok, like, people do, like, face makeup around the holiday. Or at least they did last year or the year before. I remember seeing a lot of people, like, doing face paint or, like, skits with Heat Miser.
And they also had their own substantially less good Christmas special made in the early 2010s.
Has anyone actually sat through that?
I couldn't make it through the
so.
whole thing. It's literally, I think it was just called like the Heat Miser, Snow Miser special.
No, I do remember that. I didn't watch it though.
It's not.
I refuse to watch it.
It's not good, and it's not super surprising that it's not very good because nobody involved in the original was involved in its making, really.
Technically,
I mean, some of the voices were.
Heat Miser did reprise his voice, which surprised me. I didn't know that, but that was the same guy.
A couple of voice actors reprised the roles, but none of the original writers were there. And I mean, Rankin and Bass Studios shuttered in 83?
87, I believe.
87?
I was looking... I was reading the Wikipedia article earlier.
I guess it would have to be close to that, because they did still manage to sneak out, I guess Silverhawks was probably the last of the trilogy with Thundercats.
I was going to say that for me, I skipped that Miser Brothers thing, the sequel, like many of us probably did. I guess what put me off, and it's not related, but it's sort of related because it's another holiday annual viewing, is Frosty, the cartoon version of Frosty. And then they had a Frosty Returns, I believe, where John Goodman played Frosty. And for me, that was not as good as the original. So for Christmas specials, when there is a sequel, I tend to be a little hesitant based on that experience. So I know that's a different, probably studio. Or is it the same studio?
I don't know. They did at least one sequel to Frosty.
Okay.
But I don't know if it was the one with John Goodman. But I do know they did one. Similarly, Rudolph had Rudolph's Something New Year.
Rudolph's Shiny New Year. And then there was Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July.
Yeah. My brain kept trying to say Rockin' New Year, and I'm like, nope, that's not the special. That's a different thing entirely.
You guys are checking on the status of that. I'm not sure if it's a Rankin Bass as well, but that's why I'm always a little more hesitant with sequels in that way. So,
yeah. Well, for the record, I think it's the same intellectual property, but it was distributed by CBS.
Okay.
Yeah, who owned a lot of Rankin stuff.
And that's why Rankin is on CBS. I was going to mention them. It was on last week.
They're owned by at least 3 different companies right now.
Oh my goodness.
Which is why there's actually for people who are interested in owning such a thing, they actually managed to get an agreement together to collect all of them. And that still technically doesn't include the one that they made for Fox.
Oh, wow.
Because they were not part of the agreement, and it wasn't as memorable or popular.
I also want to bring up, like, Santa Claus is Coming to Town is another interesting one, which kind of talks about, I guess, the origins of Santa, according to that particular special. But yeah. I'm not trying to, again, I'm looking at this as a grown adult, an older adult, but when I was watching it again, because I do watch it several times a year, Mrs. Claus has this song where I could be Santa Claus. So I think to myself, well, Mrs. Claus really gets the shaft, doesn't she? She really could do. She said, from behind, no one will notice that it isn't Santa. So that's the kind of thing I thought about as a grown person again, watching something like that. Also, Santa is sick in that, and the idea is, is that the year without a Santa Claus?
That's the year without a Santa Claus.
Son of a gun, I meant a year without a Santa Claus. But, the thing about that one is that Santa's really sick, and he had pneumonia the year before, and Santa might not have Christmas, so it kind of made me think about, poor Santa, he gets no sick time, and he's guilted into working even if he's deathly ill.
I mean, I'm just going to put this out there, if you think about it, he has to work once a year.
He
does a lot of overseeing. There's a lot of...
he also
the whole year long.
He has to check a list of every child at least twice.
But he's got 364 days to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you broke that down...
I don't know, there are a lot of kids. And I don't know enough about how the metric for naughty and nice works to know how little or long it would take to check each one.
I feel like also whenever I saw that one, kind of like David's sentiment, I was like, yo, Santa, what are you doing? This is like your one big thing every year and you're just sitting it out? Like, you got a cold? Come on.
Well, isn't it?
Wait, to be fair, he said he had pain in his hands and his fingers, and I was like, maybe Santa really has diabetes and neuropathy. And
he does eat a lot of cookies.
According to the Rudolph thing, Mrs. Claus makes him eat a lot prior, so that rapid weight gain and loss is
who knows
like
how that is for a system.
Is that the one where she's like, eat Santa,
eat Papa,
Who's
eat.
ever heard of a skinny Santa?
That is from that.
She's
like, God.
Is she like from Russia or what?
I mean,
she has like
wherever Burgermeister Meisterburger was from.
Yeah.
Yikes.
I just want to give a shout out to Paul Frees, the voice actor for that, just because I think he's not as iconic as Mel Blanc, but definitely from that era of voice acting. Yeah. I think he's definitely one of the less talked about, but definitely one of the best. But that's a side tangent. Anyway.
Yeah, what I do like about the voices, and this is something I talk about, is that they employ Rankin and Bass. What I really appreciate is if you're a fan of classic films or classic Hollywood actors, you'll find a treasure trove. If you haven't seen these yet, you'll hear Fred Astaire, James Cagney, you'll hear Burl Ives, who has a wonderful singing voice. So I like that he kind of employs, if you watch Mad Monster Party, which is a Halloween one, which is kind of neat, you'll have Boris Karloff and Phyllis Diller, of all people. So I just love that he incorporates
in that one as well.
Yeah, he incorporates old Hollywood actors into the script. So that's pretty interesting too.
The theme song of Mad Monster Party is just about the only thing I've seen about that film.
I was about to say, I've only ever seen the Christmas specials. I've never seen anything else Rankin Bass did.
You say that, but you'd be surprised. Have you ever seen The Last Unicorn?
No.
Really?
I was looking at on Wikipedia and IMDb. I was looking at the filmography, and I was like, I have not seen or heard of any of these. No. When you said Thundercats a few minutes ago, I was sitting here like, wait a minute, they did Thundercats?
They did do Thundercats.
The animated Hobbit?
No. I've heard of the animated Hobbit. Like, I know it exists. I've never seen it, though.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun, actually.
They have some fantastic, again, the Christmas specials are fantastic, but Rankin Bass had some phenomenal other films here and there. Mm-hmm. And worked with some very impressive people, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know what I did notice, and I always wondered this, but I never Googled it. It seems to me that a lot of Rankin Bass I don't know which one of them loves redheads, but a lot of the characters seem to have red hair. My husband and I will watch it and we'll say, there's a lot of redheads in these scripts and actually in these movies. And I can't remember if it's Santa Claus is Coming to Town or The Year Without a Santa Claus. I don't mean to confuse them. No disrespect to them. They're both wonderful. But I think even Charlie Chaplin has a cameo. Do you remember seeing, like, in the crowd of one of them, there's Charlie Chaplin is one of the figures? I don't know why. I'm not sure why he's there.
I feel like that would be the classic one, no? Like the Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
Yeah.
Maybe it was that one. And I wondered to myself, I guess I don't know why he's there.
I feel like he's very iconic.
Yeah. Right.
And as an aside to that, if you've ever watched any of the really old Disney Christmas cartoons, more often than not, there's at least one toy that is just a Charlie Chaplin doll.
Really?
Yeah. And I couldn't tell you why.
Yeah, no. Did he ever do like a big Christmas movie?
I think
it's the icon. I think it's just he's that iconic with the mustache, the bowler
There's
hat.
definitely one that takes place in winter because I very vividly have a picture of like him standing in the snow in my head.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's City Lights or
it's like
something
the one where he
else.
eats the shoe because he's living in kind of that shack.
I don't know. I can just see it. It's like a kind of like semi-medium shot of his face and neck, and he's got like a black bowler hat on, and it's the mustache and everything, and it's just like snow coming down and like piling on the head.
I have a vague recollection of him opening a doorway and just snow falling straight in on him.
Well, I guess that answers that he's just iconic. It just was like, I was watching, I'm like, wait a second, I did a double take because I don't think I ever noticed him before. I was like, oh, maybe that's just a little thing planted in there to catch your attention.
Yeah, I mean, that's not uncommon in animation especially. It also might have just been that, they needed another figurine and happened to have one of Charlie Chaplin lying around.
I mean, they did reuse. I mean, we see some of the same characters, or the kids' faces are very reminiscent of other characters from the other films.
I mean, it's any kind of stop-motion animation is expensive, even if you're outsourcing it to Japan. It's reusing whatever you can is kind of key to keeping in budget.
Oh, absolutely.
And on the redhead thing,
I know.
I want to say that
even Santa was a redhead, and Santa's wife, Mrs. Claus, was a redhead. Some of the kids are redheads. I was like, I wonder if it's something about the light.
I think it is.
The lighting.
I want to say they addressed it in that video that I sent around.
I might have missed that part. Okay.
I want to say it had something to do with it showed up really well on camera.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what it was.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
Because you're using this, we're used to modern cameras which have much wider spectrums of color they can pick up. Older film grain, red's going to pop a lot more than...
That makes sense.
Most other hair colors, actually.
And with stop motion, I'm sure there was an entirely different process, rather.
Yeah, the lighting has to be very specific, I'm sure.
Okay, I'm sure there was a method. I know redheads are statistically a small percentage of the population, but in Rankin and Bass, the universe, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Which is nice. Yeah. The one thing they do kind of lack, though, is diversity. So I know that there was one where they were showing kids from all around the world.
I was about to bring that up. I definitely remember that, like in the back of my head. I think that was The Year Without Santa Claus.
Was that the one?
Because they're all singing about how they're going to miss Christmas.
Oh,
or something
right.
like
I'll
that.
have a blue Christmas without you, maybe, or something like that. I remember the kid drew a drawing for him and said,
I'm trying to remember what they made those like stop motion figures look like, because I remember
there was one just like
I can't tell if they all had the same eyes, or for some reason I thought that they did like, unfortunately, maybe like culture eyes, and I was like, wait a minute, what's going? Even at a young age, I was like, why don't they all look the same?
Yeah,
it was a product of its time.
Yes,
yeah, for sure.
So keeping that in mind, there is no like diversity per se, except for that part where you have different cultures, children from different cultures. But
I'm even trying to think in A Year Without Santa Claus, that town of kids, I think they were all like either red or brown eyed.
Somber Town?
Yeah.
I think that's what it's called, Somber Town.
I think you're right. Yeah. There was no subtlety. No.
I mean, they were designed for children of all ages, so, subtlety sometimes is less useful than just bludgeoning them over the head with your message.
I will say that Rankin and Bass, I mean, I'm sure you guys feel the same, or maybe not. Their music, some of their songs are iconic. For me, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, I bought that CD at Circuit City years and years ago, but I've played it out. So for me, the Misfit song, Why Am I Such a Misfit, is classic. Or we're on the island of misfit toys.
One foot in front of the other was a really big
Oh, I know that's
when I was
another good
younger.
one, too.
Certified banger.
Yeah.
Oh!
Certified banger.
And that's the one from when Santa Claus is coming to town. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's Winter's
That's with the penguin,
song.
right? He has the penguin with him.
Is it a penguin? I thought it
Yeah,
was.
Topper.
Yeah.
Topper
There's
is
the
a penguin.
But I think it's him trying to convince
Yeah, it's him and the
Abominable
Winter
Snowman.
Wizard.
The
Winter Wizard. Oh no, the Winter Warlock.
Warlock.
Oh no.
Yeah, well, he's called Wizard after that point.
Oh,
That is a
that's
very
right.
odd movie when you really think back
Oh,
on
that
it.
movie was
So
on some things.
They really-
it makes a lot of sense when you think about what they were trying to do, which was, here's all of these very different stories about Santa Claus.
We're trying to
We
explain
need
him.
all of them to be true.
Right.
So, of course, it's a giant mess. It's 4 origin story movies crammed into 90 minutes and trying to make one cohesive story.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. But I guess for me, I was like, oh, that makes I mean, you go along with it for the ride. And you're like, when you think about it, you're like, that is a lot to try and put in one thing, that they hang their stockings to dry them. Oh, let's put their presents in there.
Yeah, the hide.
Or, oh, we can't get in the front door because we don't have a key. There's a chimney. We can go down that. So,
And trying to explain his, 6 different names.
oh, yeah. Oh, can we talk about Dingle, Kringle, and whatever those guys are? I try to do
The
my
first
impression
toy
of them.
makers to the king.
Oh, they're adorable.
The
They're
first
so
toy
adorable.
makers to the king. And I just remember that now.
That's just one of my favorite. It's a baby, Kringle. It's a baby. It's just such a quotable. And I love that they wear little Santa Claus outfits. I just, when I watch them now, I do sometimes think about Elf because I know Elf has so much Rankin and
Yeah.
Bass. There's so much references. So if you've seen Elf and you like Elf, you'll love Rankin
You'll
and
probably
Bass.
love these,
Absolutely.
yeah. They creep their way into a lot of holiday specials. A lot of them, especially in recent years, I've seen a lot of people trying to recreate the stop motion segments.
Is that the same snowman and elf?
It's similar,
not-
I think.
He's
And the
supposed
whale.
to be a joke, but it's not Burl Ives, it's Leon Redbone.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I remember, we were just talking about all the characters that are in these. The two, that I most remember is those beginning, epilogue scenes where it's the postman and the snowman, yeah. And that's how you knew, that's how you'd be like, all right, get hype. It's about to be a Rankin and Bass special.
Let's get it.
I also like how they do cartoon through, sometimes they use cartoons through them. And I know they did 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, which is another great special. It's a cartoon special, I think.
Yes.
Rankin and Bass might have done.
They've done a few cell animated series, because there's the Frosty the Snowman, of
Right.
course. One I was always fond of as a kid was The Stingiest Man in Town, which is just, it's just a Christmas carol.
Oh.
It's animated by Topcraft Studios, who eventually half of them became Studio Ghibli, so,
Which is hilarious to me.
There's so much anime in the Rankin and Bass specials, it's not even funny.
So tell me a little bit about that, because I'm not as familiar with anime. So do you feel like anime was influenced directly from that?
So, a little bit of both directions, kind of, because anime at that point was, just getting its start. Their earliest, the person who did the Animagic, I had to write his name down because I knew I was going to forget it, is Tadahito Mochinaga. And he's a fascinating character. He's not super big in the anime scene, but he started off animating in Japan, moved to, at the time, occupied China, stayed in China pretending to be Chinese, and that's when he started doing the claymation stuff, because they had a shortage of film. So instead of actually filming, he just essentially used puppetry so that he could save celluloid. And then that became hugely popular and eventually led to Rankin and Bass reaching out to him to animate their specials. They have some very fascinating stuff in their history.
Well, interestingly enough, the studio that Rankin and Bass outsourced to was, and I don't remember the name of it, but it was the studio created by Osamu Tezuka, the so-called...
Yes, that is Mushi Productions.
Mushi Productions. And he created Astro Boy and is known as
he's the godfather of manga.
Oh, okay.
He is their Walt Disney, as well as him being a great admirer of Disney's work. One of his his best known is without a doubt Astro Boy. But people who know more about Western animations would probably know Kimba the White Lion best due to the whole lawsuit with Disney about that.
And Astro Boy, speaking of terrible remakes.
Yeah.
Side note.
They also worked with Topcraft Studios, who became two other studios, but the bigger of the two was Studio Ghibli. The other one is, I think, Pacific Productions, who would basically best be known for doing the Thundercats.
Oh, okay.
They're the animators that stayed behind, basically, while everyone else went on to bigger things.
Well, if you go through, there's an interesting little Wikipedia article. If you go down that rabbit hole, they actually split into so many
companies.
Studio Madhouse, Sunrise even.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's nuts how so many animators came from the company that Rankin and Bass was directly, working with, and then they exploded into these industry giants of Japanese media. It's
in the case of Topcraft, basically back-to-back their films were The Last Unicorn and then Nausicaa and the Valley of Wind.
Good.
After which many of them left to become Studio Ghibli.
Well, thank you. I didn't know the relation to anime, so that's very interesting. I mean, so if you like anime, you'll like Rankin and Bass. I guess my question is to you guys, or all of us, is we're all different generations that are here talking. So what do you think? I mean, it's appealed, I would say, to all of us. And why does it still continue? For me, they came out right around when I was born or slightly before, so it was kind of fresh. But yet these shows, these specials are popular still with all sorts of generations. What do you think it is about that really appeals to a multitude of people? Like, what's so special? I mean, you asked me that in the beginning. For me, I guess it was the nostalgia, the whole story of being a misfit. I think that's why I liked Rudolph so much, because I may have felt that way as a child. And so I loved that there was a place where everybody was a misfit, was kind, everybody was together, you could fit in. But why do you guys think, being different?
A part of it for me will always be just, as somebody who really loves just animation in general, they're fascinating. Like, nobody at the time was doing things like the Animagic stuff, really. And even modern claymation looks so different from what they had there, because they didn't use clay. Those were all essentially just wood and plastic dolls that they were working with. But I think what kind of always draws me back is very similar to the Charlie Brown Christmas special, actually, where is this really good? Well, no. There's a lot of flaws here, and they're very noticeable, but you can tell the people working on this cared enough to be working on this, even though parts of it are very cheesy and some of the animation is kind of awkward in places. But that gives it this sort of charm, where it's like, this is flawed, but you can still see all of the love and craftsmanship that went into this.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I remember, so as a kid who didn't have cable, everything we watched was either on local channels or on VHS. And by this time, I feel a lot of the Rankin and Bass stuff was sort of syndicated, so it did not show up on a lot of local channels.
Right.
But I remember we had a lot of VHSs, so December starts, and me and my sister would just watch every special, whether it was like Veggie Tales or, A Christmas Story, and Rudolph was on there. And like Jeff said, I was used to, I watched Jason and the Argonauts and all these other movies with Ray Harryhausen and his stop motion
Flash of the Titans.
Amazing things. And going back and looking at Rudolph, the animation is really rough. But as someone, because the only ones I ever saw as a kid were Rudolph and A Year Without a Santa Claus. And even that one, I sort of barely remembered from then. But rewatching them now, looking at, if you take Rudolph versus A Year Without a Santa Claus, the animation improves so much. And it's still hokey. It's still kind of goofy because it's still effectively cheap. But like Jeff said, there's a lot of love and kind of heart that's thrown into this that you're just like, you can't deny it. And it feels good because it's the season. I don't know. It's a snowball of just fun. At the heart of it, it's fun. And I think that's kind of what's kept my interest.
I think what drew me to them is kind of that it wasn't that classic, at a young age, at least if you lived in a religious household like I did, it's not the Roman Catholic story of Christmas. So you had the Island of Misfit Toys, or you had specials like Year Without Santa Claus with Heat Mice and everything, to where Christmas almost felt more inclusive, and it was kind of, you don't have to be like the baby Jesus or Santa Claus to take part in Christmas, or you don't have to see things a certain way to enjoy the holiday, which was kind of nice. Kind of just that idea that Christmas is other things to other people, and that it's not necessarily all the same to everybody. So, like, the idea that you had, like, the Winter Warlock and in Santa Claus is Coming to Town, or you had Heat Miser and Mother Nature in The Year Without Santa Claus, and that you could, like, tell these different stories, and that it doesn't have to be the same one every time, like, just in a different special.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I hadn't really even thought about that, but yeah, like, I know Rankin and Bass did. I know they did The Little Drummer Boy, and I think they did a version of the Gift of the Magi, or not the Gift of the Magi.
remember the Little Drummer Boy.
Yeah, they did Nestor, which was Nestor, the
Christmas
donkey, yeah.
And like, those ones are ones I don't remember as much. And yeah, it probably is largely because I'm kind of the opposite. I came from a very not religious family. And I oftentimes kind of forget that Christmas is a religious holiday, because that's not how I've ever really thought about it. And these movies, you know, the fact that he only gives out gifts on Christmas was just because he was like, look, man, I'm getting too many orders.
I'm too old for this.
I'm only going to do this one day from now on. I can't keep making all these trips.
And also, speaking about the animation, I was on YouTube a few weeks ago, and they, like, Clash of the Titans, they did, someone had, like, restored the footage to where if it had been at 60 frames per second and then, like, 120 frames per second, the animation of, like, the statue, I remember that was a big one, was the statue moving, the big brass statue.
The Talos, yeah.
And I would argue that they almost benefited from the technical deficiencies they had back then in animation, because when you saw them in these frame rates that we have now, it's atrocious.
Yeah.
As to where it almost looks better the way they did it back then from a technical standpoint, because they had so little, they had to work with what they had, and it almost made a better animation as a result.
I mean, a lot of that is, well, that's what it was designed to work with, you know? Okay, what do we got? Well, we got like 30 frames per second at worst. Okay, so how many of these do we need for each of those frames? 6. Oh, no. But I mean, and then you have, you know, the sort of, again, stop motion has largely fallen by the wayside. There are, amusingly enough, several parodies in other shows of the Rankin Bass style. Mm-hmm. And I mean, now you have Studio Laika, who is light years ahead of what we had before then. It's again, it's fascinating to, you know, we mentioned the difference between Rudolph and Year Without a Santa Claus. That's, I think, about 10 years between those two films, and they improved that much. And then, you know, they disappear in the 80s, and the next major claymation theatrical release is, amusingly enough, another Christmas film, The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Debatable.
It counts. It is as Christmassy as anything else, and as Halloweeny as anything else.
I would argue it's almost more of a Christmas movie, because you have the Halloween song in the beginning, and obviously they're all Halloween creatures, but the main storyline all takes place after Jack finds Christmas Town.
Yeah. And then, you know, that's the last major claymation release for a while until Coraline, and then it's fascinating to see, because these are just like leaps of technology each time.
You've got Coraline, the Box Trolls,
did James and the Giant
Paranorman,
Peach
James and the Giant
Peach was a little bit after.
That was in the 90s now.
Before Christmas.
Just a little bit after. It in fact features a scene with Jack.
Jack, yeah, as a pirate captain.
It's so funny that you guys, for me, I don't even think of that as claymation. When I think of claymation, it's still like Rankin. They're just
Rankin and Bass.
Yeah, they're just the icons to me, and that doesn't mean that stuff isn't, but it's so iconic.
That's your starting point.
Absolutely.
That's the development of the technique, and then refinement takes time, and we keep getting, again, giant animation nerd here, but when Laika did Paranorman, they started making smear frames as part of the claymation process. That's phenomenal. And I mean, really only feasible in the modern age with 3D printing and things like that.
I was about to say, I'd be very interested to see how they would do, like, if Laika had done, or like had Rankin and Bass been around today with the likes of Laika and stuff like that. What that animation,
what,
like when you think of like Paranorman or Kubo and the Two Strings, like that type of kind of the way those two movies brought, brought like scope into claymation. Like, it didn't have to be 2D two sides of the screen. It gave you like this very big sense of scope. And like, if Rankin Bass had that when he was making these specials, how would it have either positively or negatively affected what he was doing?
I wouldn't have changed it for the world. I know what I imagine the possibilities must be exciting and things, but I would not change that. I guess I'm so emotionally attached to it.
I think there's 100% merit to the Rankin and Bass style. I think it was its own thing, and it had its own razzle dazzle. You can't get nowadays they're somewhere else. They are beyond it.
They are beyond, yeah.
But just because they're beyond doesn't mean that the Rankin Bass are...
Oh, no. By no means would I call this bad, but it would be fascinating to see... unfortunately, I believe both Rankin and Bass at this point have passed away. I know Jules Bass passed away earlier this year.
In October. Yeah. I did not know that he was 85.
He's also born here in Philly.
He is a Philly guy.
Yeah.
The things I've learned in the past, 5 hours about this, just from a quick, I should just brush up really quick.
Doing that research, you'll learn a lot of interesting stuff. Because, again, fascinating bit of animation history, fascinating, I'm sure shows were doing Christmas specials before the Rankin and Bass stuff.
It's weird, but have they lasted? I think that's a testament to their longevity. Right? They're still around.
They've lasted forever, and I'm sure there are other oddballs. I mean, I make it a point every year to watch the Hey Arnold Christmas special, and I know people who will swear by a handful of other shows.
SpongeBob, I know, at least from my generation, there was the regular one, and then there was a claymation.
The claymation one, yeah,
is the one that everyone else swears by.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, everybody has their Christmas traditions, and so,
And I mean, that's part of the fun, is that they're kind of always expanding. The Rankin and Bass stuff has never left, again, to the point that, some of the people who own the rights have been trying to recreate some of that magic, not necessarily successfully, but, And then you have one guy on the internet who has managed to recapture that animation style phenomenally.
Through Blender, no less.
Yeah, through
a 3D modeling program.
It's worthy, kids. His stuff is fantastic.
I actually wanted to bring him up because it's one of the things that I didn't realize until he was talking about it, but what gives the Rankin and Bass so much style that every time people do a claymation parody or whatever, they always recreate, yes, it is. So it's the, if you look, they always try to get the mouths, they always do it wrong. Because every time they make an ooh sound, there's weird, gross lips, or it's just a circle. He uses some more colorful language to describe it, but essentially it always looks off. What Rankin and Bass did in that style, the animators, instead of making an O, made kind of a inverted graph, I guess. I forget, a bell curve, inverted bell curve. Yeah, so that shape, if you could picture it. And when he said it, it clicked because all of a sudden, that mouth shape makes more sense with that style. And in animation, something about it, the circle just doesn't look right, but this other shape fits perfectly. I can't describe why it does that, but it just works. And they cracked that early on. I don't know how, but ever since then, it's any kind of parody or whatever just misses that mark because they try so hard to recreate the clay style. But if they had that one thing, it almost might make these more passable.
I mean, you'll kind of get that, because they're trying to recreate a style with modern, Nowadays, we actually try to make people look like they're saying what they're saying in animation, unless we're dubbing it, in which case, good luck. But they really didn't care quite as much to get it exactly right back then. They cared more that the model looked good while it was talking.
So, let me ask you guys, whether it's thinking hard about it or whatever, what's your favorite, Rankin Bass film, and what is your favorite character, if you have one?
Year Without Santa Claus is my favorite special because it was so kind of new and weird. And you had Heat Miser and Mother Nature and all these other characters. But then my favorite character, again, I have to ride for Yukon Cornelius. I mean, he was always saving the day. He had the pickaxe, which I thought was pretty cool, and the beard.
And the best mustache in the history of claymation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I think we all appreciate him. For me, it's obviously Rudolph I had mentioned, and I love Hermie. Something about him wanting to be a dentist, so putting, working on the doll's teeth or whatever, and there's just something so different about him. I don't know, he was from the flip of his hair, to wanting to be a dentist, to his singing, there was something I connected to him for some reason. I just thought he was adorable. He was different, so maybe in some way that spoke to me. But the music and Rudolph, Burl Ives to me is Christmas. So when I hear Burl Ives, it just transports me. I mean, I know he's a singer predominantly from the 50s and 60s, but I think he has a great voice. So, and the Misfit Toys, I enjoy all of them, and I think about some of them, and I'm like, you're not really, if you really think about it, you're like, are they really misfit? Because the gun could just be filled with water instead of jam. A spotted elephant really isn't that big of a deal. If we got a train, why don't we put some round wheels on him?
Charlie in the box.
Yeah, I mean, can't we just call him Jack? I mean, you know, let's be honest here,
You can
guys.
change your name. It's a brave new
I
world,
know.
sir.
Just exactly. So I don't know. They were adorable too. So yeah, Charlie is my other. He's my favorite misfit toy too. I guess that kind of sad quality to his voice. He tugged at my heartstrings. But yeah, looking back on it, you thought, I don't know if they're quite misfit, but that fits the theme. And then also we didn't talk about the fact that King Moonracer is like the flying lion.
Yeah.
What is King Moonracer, man?
I mean, flying lions are just a thing.
Yeah,
very common in mythology. But yeah, it is. Why is he in charge of the misfit toys? How did this happen?
Of all the
I
things...
want a King Moonracer movie.
Yeah, where's the origin story of that?
Yeah,
That's
where
what I
did he
wanna
come
know.
from? But yeah, I almost forgot about him for a hot second. But
Studio Leica, get on it.
yeah, so for me, that was always but I do appreciate Year Without a Santa Claus for the Miser Brothers are my favorite. And I love that Mother Nature slaps that down because she's the one who gets them to agree. It's like, really, if you look at it, Mrs. Claus got, Santa, fixed all that situation in the Year Without a Santa Claus. She was the one who kind of encouraged those two elves. I forget their Jingle and Jangle.
Yep.
Jingle and Jangle.
Jingle and Jangle to go down to whatever I forget the name of that town. It was like not Sombertown. This is the one that was warm and it never
Was it
something
Somerville?
like that.
It's something like
It didn't
that.
snow ever, and they wanted to make it snow. So she was kind of the orchestration behind all that. So I love the way women kind of take charge a little bit in Rankin and Bass as well. So I don't
And I
know.
also love that the whole arrangement there was like, listen, I'll let you have snow here, but you have to let me make it warm.
I know, North Pole. Yeah.
It's like,
But it's so fun how these characters just work.
Yeah, they do.
It's like
the Miser Brothers completely made up for the film.
And who are those three little guys? Are they their sons? Are they their
Yeah.
like their little doppelgangers? Who are they?
Yeah,
And they just
henchmen.
come out for the song, and then they
And then they
pop back.
They were kind of like Oompa
what's their
Loompas.
deal? What is the deal with
you have a
them?
very eccentric boss, so just go with it. I don't know what he's paying them, but
What is the pay grade for henchmen to the Miser Brothers?
And you must look exactly like
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
Which one pays better?
But that's another great song and a great scene in that particular movie too. So yeah, they're really. It's hard to pick. It's like picking a favorite child because they are really close to the heart. But naturally, you gravitate towards maybe one character over another. How about you guys? Do you guys have a favorite character or a favorite film?
So, I mean, I'm not going to cheat because the favorite film is, for me, without a doubt, The Last Unicorn. But as far as the Christmas
Come on,
specials
Jeff.
go-
Christmas.
As far as the Christmas specials go, it is Santa Claus is Coming to Town.
Okay.
And my favorite character is probably the Winter Warlock.
Oh, nice. Okay.
yeah, he's fun.
He's just fun. And, again, it's like, why is there a Winter Warlock? Why isn't there? He's here. He's going to be fun. He's going to have the best song to convince him to stop being evil. And it's going to be a good time.
just bums me out that his magic is tied to his evil.
To being evil, yeah, that's
When
kind
he's not
of a
evil, he's
downer.
like, hey, I lost my powers, sorry.
This is the best I got right now.
My name's Joe now. I live here.
So what about you, Dave? Do you feel the same, or do you have a different?
Well, I guess
If you had to pick one of the Christmas films or any of the characters?
Year Without a Santa Claus is like the funnest, but I've watched it probably the least of them all. Just because, again, that's not one I saw when I was a kid. I watched Rudolph every year, if not once, like twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the one I guess I think about the most. Yukon Cornelius is definitely there. Although I do have an appreciation for the elf taskmaster, or whatever his name is. The one that kicks in the door and screams, "Why aren't you at elf practice?"
That's so good.
That became a meme a couple years ago. And it was hysterical because people would just edit that door in to just videos. So you'd just be, watching something and all of a sudden he was there. And just this angry little green man And then when he wasn't screaming, he had this kind of like, no, Santa. And it was like, what?
Why aren't you?
He seemed permanently stressed out and agitated to me,
he
I
was
guess.
strung out.
Yeah.
I guess you kind of have to be if you're in charge of all of the elves.
Talk about someone who needs a break more than Santa.
Yeah, he's the guy doing all the work.
To be fair, I've never been in a managerial position.
Right.
I don't know how I would handle it if one of my workers had just a crisis. And I was like, I need to change jobs. I'm like, this is okay, but not right now.
Absolutely not at this moment.
This is the worst possible time.
Wait until January, please.
Give it like 6 days even. Like, we are right there.
Do your aspirations need to happen now?
Well, it seems like to each of us, something speaks different. But the only thing about Rudolph that I sometimes think about is he was naturally a red-nosed fella. And the whole idea of covering up who you are, I guess that's a good message, is like you don't need to hide who you are.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting that nobody had time for him, when he had the red nose until he was needed for an important mission. And then they were like, by the way, we need you now. We treated you like...
That was always my problem with the original song.
treat you
as
like
well.
crap.
They
Yeah.
gaslit Rudolph.
Yeah. Word of the year, by the way.
They wouldn't even let
It
him
is.
play any of the Christmas games, and then all of a sudden he's head reindeer.
Yeah, because Santa needs him now.
Yeah.
Nobody had time for him before.
I want a movie about December 26th for being Rudolph. Back to the bottom of the barrel, are we?
Well, I've enjoyed talking about this because it just makes me feel like a kid again. It's something,
It's, there is a childlike wonder,
Yeah.
and you do grow out of it, I think. I think at points in your life, you're like, this is goofiness, but you never stop associating it with it.
No.
And if you just let yourself have fun, you can just fall right into these things.
Oh, absolutely.
It's one of those things where it's like, you get to that angsty teenage phase and you're like, I'm not watching this. Like, once you're back out of it, you're like, oh yeah!
The Miser Brothers songs are an absolute, pinnacle of that. I didn't care about these things, but then when that resurfaced on the internet, it was like, hold on, this kind of slaps. And then you watch the movie and you're like, I don't know what happened there, but I like your funny words, Magic Man.
Yeah. It is fascinating because the films are kind of like 80% nonsense, but as long as you're just going with it, it doesn't matter that none of this makes sense. Because none of it makes sense, so be fine with it.
I think that's kind of what David shared with me, this video just about the origins of Rankin and Bass, and it just seemed to fit into what their MO was, which was random crazy stuff that doesn't really make sense, but here's a song, and it's fun to watch. So
I feel like that's DreamWorks is trying to do that these days and fail. Or no, it's not DreamWorks I think of. It's Illuminations. They're the people with the minions, right?
Yeah. Oh, but they're all so good.
It's just, here's a lot of noise and color. Please don't pay attention to anything else.
Maybe that's just being of a certain generation, but I don't.
I mean,
I feel like Minions aside, I feel like Illumination puts out banger after banger.
There are other films I generally enjoy, but anything involving the Minions, I'm just like, this is loud and nothing is happening.
I like the first Despicable Me.
Yes,
and then I saw
the first
nothing
one.
till the third, and I was like, okay, I think I'm I didn't need this to be a story. I'm kind of tired
It
of
did not need to be a franchise.
I feel like Despicable Me could have been a one-off and it would have been fine.
Yeah,
I think
I'd have preferred
I think the second
universe
one
where
was
we got
okay.
The sequels to Megamind. That's
another one though. I feel like I didn't need. I rewatched Megaron recently. They pack so much into that hour and a half. I'm like, oh my god, this is like 3 movies.
Yeah. And again, same with, especially Santa Claus is Coming to Town, is it's like, I'm sorry, we're where now and when?
How is Burgermeister allowed to exist in a world where Winter Wizard exists?
Well, and then, you're going through this whole mythology, the whole movie.
Right.
And then suddenly they're like, hold on, forgot to mention the religious aspect of this whole thing. And then there's the weird, marriage scene. Not that there's anything wrong with it. It kind of feels like you're going, and then you just kind of hit a wall for a minute.
They said, everybody press pause. This is for the Roman Catholics.
Yes, it did feel
this,
that way.
They might as well just flash, please bow your heads on the screen. It's just kind of like and go. Here's the climax.
Do you want to get wide distribution for your film? Well, let me tell you.
It's an interesting slice of Americana. Yeah. But are there any final thoughts? Anything you guys feel like you haven't talked about or want to talk about? Any favorite songs?
At this point, it's going to be like the Misfit Toys, the Miser Brothers.
Right, those
one
are
foot
the
in
top
front of the other.
Yep. I have to say, like, Clarice was one of my least favorite characters. No disrespect, girl. That's Rudolph's love interest.
Did they need to invent a squad?
What was she in there for?
I don't even like her song. I feel terrible. I'm sorry, Clarice.
Who was in the boardroom that said, you know what Rudolph needs?
A girlfriend.
Rudolph needs a squeeze.
Make sure to put a little polka dot bow on her.
What does he get up for in the morning?
Make sure you know she's a girl.
And like the eyes are just a little bit bigger.
Yeah. Oh, she had those eyelashes too. Yeah. I'm sorry. I just thought it was like unnecessary, maybe, but
you know that might kind of line up with. We mentioned that with the Japanese aspect. If it was coming from Mushi. Osamu Tezuka was inspired to draw anime eyes because he saw Bambi. That might not be as insane as we think it is.
Oh, okay.
It's true. It is kind of funny. I wonder how much of that is sort of that bizarre cross-contamination of these two cultures.
I would argue, just as a final side point, that Santa Claus Coming to Town might have the most underrated songs ever. Because even when you brought it up earlier, when you said the first Toy Makers of the King, I'm like, banger! And I would not have been able to tell you what movie that came from.
Yeah. It's first Toy Makers of the King, no more Toy Makers to the King, one foot in front of the other.
Right.
The love song wasn't very good, but other than that, yeah.
Yeah, it might be underappreciated. I feel like Rudolph is the one they really hone in on every year. I guess because
Rudolph
of the icon.
He's the that's their
Rudolph
first
is
one.
the icon.
That's
that song is the the thing. So
I did have like a minor felt like a mental tick when I think I was in the store the other day and I heard "We Are Santa's Elves."
Oh my god, I would have sang along.
You would have sang along, and I just kind of went, "Oh no,
get me out of the store."
It's not bad. It's just you hear it and you're like, "Oh my god, what?" Please.
It's kind of funny though, because it's. I think of that animation before I actually think of the actual Rudolph song, which is, I think, 20 years older than it.
Right.
And I know the Fleischer brothers did a Rudolph cartoon, and I've seen it maybe once.
Yes. May I also suggest, if you want to bridge the gap between Christmas and New Year's, you check out Rudolph's Shiny New Year. Yeah. That's another one. It's a little weird. Baby New Year kind of goes, I think they look in different time periods for Baby New Year, and they have 1776, and Ben Franklin shows up. It's
Rudolph can travel through time.
Yeah. No. I'm just saying, try it.
Back in time to the first.
It gets a little weird, but fun.
Get the Declaration of Independence. Give me a Nick Cage Rankin and Bass. I'll take it.
That would be kind of fun.
He does anything these days. Let's do
it. I mean, hopefully he's paid off all of those debts by now.
I was about to say, we may have just missed the Nick Cage Does Anything era.
Maybe.
Unless he buys another dinosaur skull.
He's supposed to be Dracula next year.
So you can finally be vampire. All right. You go, Nick Cage.
I love that this conversation has really spanned the gamut from Rankin and Bass to Nick Cage.
We've hit everything.
Absolutely.
That's how you know you're talking about...
The 3 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
That's how you know you're talking about a cultural touchstone, is when this discussion can just sort of reach into any other topic.
Mm-hmm.
Which is exactly what we strive for here on this podcast.
I mean, a little bit, yeah.
Without any further ado, thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Thanks for having us.
It's been an absolute blast.
This really has. As a sort of final episode for the year, this has been a great one.
Go home and check out the specials. I'll probably go home and watch one tonight. Maybe sing Santa's Elves in honor of Dave, since he loves that song so much.
Absolutely. I highly recommend. There is a YouTube video with the animator we mentioned earlier, Worthy Kids, who does phenomenal stuff on YouTube. It is called The Strangest Rankin Bass Films, featuring Worthy Kids. I highly recommend checking it out if you're at all interested in some of the, the behind the scenes or just passionate people talking about it. And yeah, that's going to be just about it for this episode of Geek Out.
If you would like to join us on a future episode, you can head on over to lansdownlibrary.org/podcasts, and there'll be a green register here button.
Thank you all for listening. Happy holidays, and we'll see you next time.
New Year. Yeah.